As always, we speak on the Pasha of the week, and of course, with Hashem, we'll try to connect it and to find how closely interrelated it is to the events of the week. The big events this week are Yud Beis and Gimel Tammuz. The Pasha of the week, you all know, is Pasha's Bolak. And Bolak sought the assistance of Bilam, who was a Navi, literally speaking, a Goy, a Navi. Hashem spoke to him. It says that how come Hashem has bestowed such a prize, such a privilege on a Goy? Tomei. He was a decadent Goy. This is to close the mouths of the Goyim who will come back with a complaint that you did not provide us with Nevi'im to guide us, to follow a decent and moral life. So Hashem gave him a Nevi'im. And you know what kind of Navi Bilam was? You'd be shocked to hear, the Gemara says that Bilam in the Nevuah was comparable to Moshe.
Comparable?
To Moshe Rabbeinu.
What's comparable?
Come on. You know what comparable is?
Bigger?
No, comparable.
Comparable. No. Comparable. Okay, now I got it. Because today someone said that it was bigger, that's why I didn't understand. Or like bigger, I think it was.
Yeah, okay. Here's on par. You know what on par is?
No.
Because in the Pasuk it says, later on, at the end of Chumash Dvarim, it says, "V'loikom Novi b'Yisrael oid k'Moshe." No other Novi stood up like Moshe, but it says b'Yisrael, in the Jewish nation. So the Gemara says, "B'Yisrael loikom, aber b'um Yisrael kom." Amongst Eden there was no other Novi like Moshe, but by other nations there was. Umanoi, and who is he? That's Bilam ben Be'er. So this was Bilam ben Be'er, who had a godly relation on par with Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, but wasn't it that Bilam used to speak to Hashem like only for one moment in the middle of the night, that he knew a time, but Moshe could speak to Hashem all the time, no?
This is what the Gemara says.
I believe it.
And you can see Hashem. He has a conversation with Hashem. Hashem asks him, what is this about? And he tells him, Hashem says, should I go, should I not go? And then as Rashi, you saw it in the Rashi. Rashi says that instead of giving them guidance and uplifting their life to a spiritual status, he in fact destroyed their lives. He brought immorality by going even beyond that which they had before. So this is kind of a parenthetical comment.
Did he start gambling? He was one of the initiators of gambling?
I don't know anything about that. No, he brought immorality. He exposed them. We'll learn at the end of the Pasha, you'll see. I said this is a side point to understand what is the story with Bilam. Bilam was a Navi in the true sense of the word. And Bolak hired Bilam to come and assist him in destroying or fending off the Jewish people. Because he saw that there's no way that he can challenge the Eden on the battlefield, because he saw what happened to Sichon and Og, who were the superpowers of the area, and so therefore he asked Bilam to come and help him. How is he going to help him? He's going to bestow a curse on them. And there was a precedent to that, because we also learned in Rashi that actually Sichon was victorious over of a Moav in an earlier war, and the victory came as a result of Bilam's curse. So he knew that Bilam is a tried and trusted power. So he came to ask Bilam to come and help him wage war against him. And you already learned that Bilam held him off, then Hashem said, don't go, and then finally Hashem consented, you should go. He went along, and he came there, and you'll learn later, and he gave him all kinds of different honors, and he made the whole big fuss and so forth. And finally, when he came to doing his job, Hashem instructed Bilam what to say, and instead of saying a curse, uttering a curse, he uttered a blessing. And this repeated itself 3 times. And each time, the blessing was of a greater impact, a greater depth than the previous one. And the Gemara says, because it says later on, also in Chumash Dvarim, it says that Hashem did not want to listen to Bilam, and he transformed, he turned around, he turned around his curses into blessings. So the Gemara says, this tells us that the blessings were the exact opposite of the curses, which means that from the blessings we can deduce, we can learn, we can understand what he intended to say in the curses. So the curses were really, what he planned to say, were very sharp and devastating curses. And instead Hashem turned around and bestowed brachas on him. The brachas that Bilam expressed in this parsha and the Jewish people were superb brachas. They were brachas of the highest kind that you ever received. They were brachas that describe the Jewish people in their full glory, all the way down to Mashiach. As a matter of fact, the Rambam, when he describes in Yichus Malachim and Mashiach, the last Perek in Rambam is dedicated to Mashiach. There's 2 prokim Mashiach. And the Rambam is very, very noticeably, very centrally, is basing on what Bilam said. That in Bilam's Nevuah, there is the meaning of Mashiach stated in most expressed and dynamic manner. And the Rambam points out in so to speak, in focusing in and breaking down what Bilam was saying, the Rambam is pointing out that in Bilam's Nevuah there seems to be repetition in the same posik, repetitive concept, but they're not repetitions. It seems to be the same concept in 2 different wording, but they're not the same. One is referring to the first Mashiach, was David HaMelech. David HaMelech is also called Mashiach Hashem. And the second part is referring to Mashiach ben David, Mashiach Tzidkenu that we are waiting to come. In addition to the principle of Mashiach ben David, the one that we are waiting for, will conquer all his enemies like David HaMelech did, and will reestablish the Jewish nation in its place with all its powers and so forth. There's a profound difference between David and Mashiach, as is expressed in the Nevuah and as is further explained. David will conquer all his enemies, and Mashiach will subdue the enemies. There's a difference in how this conquest and this subjugation will happen, and to what degree this will happen. David will conquer the nations who oppose God and oppose the Jewish people. But their opposition will not dissipate. They will maintain their opposition. David will have power over them and will keep them subdued and keep them under his rod, so to speak, under his power. And this is in fact substantiated. This is in fact what happened. It's related in Tanakh, and Rashi brings it down also, if you learn carefully, that David conquered Moab and Ammon and so forth, and he subdued them under his hand. But this was all a subjugation against their will. Mashiach, on the other hand, his rule over the nations will not be by force of power. This is what the Rambam says at the very end of the Rambam, that ultimately when Mashiach comes, and that glorious period will be such that all the nations will recognize the oneness and the omnipresence of God. And they all will gather together to serve the one God. There will be no longer any kind of disparity on that. This will be, in other words, fully accepted and understood by all the nations. This is the primary element of Mashiach. Mashiach is not merely that the Jewish people will have some kind of a power. We're not interested in power of the nations. But we want Mashiach. We want the elimination of Golus. We want the elimination of Avodah Zarah. We want the elimination of confusion. We want to have a clear recognition of godliness, and that the world should be permeated with the truth of godliness. This is Mashiach is. The Rambam says that it is imperative, it is a demand of the Torah, that every Yid believe in Mashiach. It says in the Torah, you have to believe in Mashiach. Not only you have to believe in Mashiach, but you have to be in a constant state of longing, awaiting his coming, any moment. That's what the Rambam states. And the Rambam says we should have to scream, do you want Mashiach now? This is not a novel thing. This is what the Rambam says. And he has to be anticipating and waiting for Mashiach all the time, if he wants to conform to the instructions of Moshe Rabbeinu of the Torah. Now, it's one thing to believe that every word in the Torah is true. Of course, every word in the Torah is true. I have no problem with, so to speak, giving it lip service. I believe that Moshe Rabbeinu said everything is true. And on the other hand, really, what does it hurt me if I say I believe in Mashiach? If you say I believe in Shabbos, well, that puts a burden on you, right? You have to keep Shabbos. You're not allowed to do certain things on Shabbos. I believe in kashrus, that puts an instruction and a restriction on it. Believe in Mashiach, big deal. I believe, so well, okay. The Torah says I believe, so I believe. Obviously, there has to be a belief. It's imperative that you believe. It means that it has to be something that you accept and absorb in your mind. You can actually relate to. You actually recognize that this is the way it should be. And this is what you're waiting for to happen. Just to give it a lip service is, you're too young for this. I'm almost your age, and I can still sit straight. There must be a way that we should be able to understand and fully relate to this principle of Mashiach. Both. The principle of Mashiach contains two elements. The first, and so to speak, the more superficial element, is that there will be such a situation. There will be a man who will come and will redeem the Jewish people. And as I said, this is something which doesn't demand too much insight and too much personal commitment. It says in the Torah, so I don't doubt in the Torah, it's going to be. Doesn't change anything in my daily life. Then there is another element. This is a much more personal, much more demanding element, and that is to recognize and to understand and to actually sense and feel that such an element is possible, not only possible, but it's imperative. Imperative? It must be. It must happen. This means imperative. It has to be. Why does it have to be? Because this is the underlying absolute truth of the very existence of the world. And the truth ultimately has to surface. After all the confusion that we've gone through for 5,000 years, and the world is obviously changing. Now it's changing, so to speak, at an accelerated speed. It has to happen, because that's the inherent truth behind the life of the world. Therefore, it has to happen, and it has to surface. So we have to understand that this is the inherent truth, and if we understand that this is inherent truth, then we understand automatically it has to happen. It has to be. And then, particularly, when we say that, as Rama points out, that actually this is something which will be recognized not just by the Yid, it will be recognized universally. Universally? By all, the entire world. By the Goyim as well. Not at the same level as Yidden. Yidden have, after all, different neshamas, but they will also recognize this principal truth, and they also drop all other views as insignificant and folly and false, and will turn to serve Hashem. Since that this is something which will have to be incorporated, including even the Goyim, so to speak, which means that this is something which will be understood simply on the simple worldly level, not just from a high neshama level. It will be understood on the simple level. We know, our Rebbe told us many times, that this is the last moments of Golus. And that this is the time when the the principles and the spirit of Mashiach, even though it's not universal, it's not rampantly recognized, but it's something that is readily available to each one individually. That on an individual basis, everyone is capable of recognizing internal to himself, in his own mind, in his own heart, this truth, and so to speak, as the Rebbe expressed it, live with Mashiach. And it has to be at a level that even his goy, so to speak, our own goy, should understand. Because this is something which the whole world will understand. Thus, we have to ask ourselves, we have to focus in and understand, how is it, where do I see, personally, this truth of Mashiach? And how am I capable of relating to it? When we speak about who's going to become a man who's going to redeem the world, and I said this is lip service. It's very difficult to fathom. I mean, how is it going to happen? It's such a big world. We have to understand that this, as I said, this has to happen from inside out. Which means that this is actually the inherent truth. And in order for us to relate and believe that this is the inherent truth, we have to find it ourselves, that this is in fact the inherent truth. This is the time now when this recognition is readily available and accessible. I want to step back a little bit, because many of us were exposed, to all kinds, to many different views, a little bit more. I just want to sort of encapsulate one principle. We have to know, historically, that the world is now in process, so to speak, in bringing Mashiach for 5,000 years plus. It's a long time. It's a very long time. And many, many things, many variations occurred during this time. I'm not suggesting that you go and study history of the world, but I just want to present it to you, as I said, in a capsule. Every possible venue, path, away from God, away from Mashiach, was sought and tried by the human being. Every possible. First there was Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah in the simplest and the lowest level, in idols and all that. Then came the Greeks. I don't know if you're familiar with the Greeks. They worshipped the human body. Okay? They say, oh, this is a step up, right? Worship the human body. And every human being who was stronger than the other, he was called a god. Their lexicon. Came to the Romans, and they worshipped their diver, their grandeur, their covet. Like the Gemara tells a story, this is all different stages in world history. The Romans, they were supposed to have come claim that, okay, now we reached the a stage in the world that is going to elevate the world to true human and humane level. And even the Gemara speaks about it. You know that Reb Shimon ben Yochai was in danger and ran away and hid for 13 years in a cave. Do you know why? Huh? Why?
Because he said that everything they built over there is all for them.
That's why there was a discussion among the Chacham, and Reb Shimon ben Yochai was privy to that discussion. He was present. And in that discussion, one of the Chacham said, what a great nation this is, according to the Romans, because they lived under the Roman rule. They built bridges for human services. They built bathhouses. They built marketplaces, all to enrich human life. Sounds great. And Reb Shimon ben Yochai countered and says, you are making a mistake. That is not what they had in mind. This was all a facade. They did it all for their own grandeur. Sorry?
That's how you pronounce that word. Facade. Yeah. That was big.
Okay. Sometimes we'll have a lesson in English. No, I'm not prepared for that. This is all a lie. In other words, you think the world has now reached some sense of truth? Forget it. This is all not a deviation, not to recognize the truth, to cover it up with some other things. And the Romans, it came back to the Romans, to the emperor somehow, and he threatened to kill Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He sent out his guards to get Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Shimon ben Yochai had to run away, and he hid for 13 years in the cave. And of course, we benefited from this immensely, because that cave brought with it the Zohar.
Who was the guy that taught on him? Yehuda something?
What?
Yehuda ben... The guy that taught on them. That taught on Yehuda...
Do you have to mention that?
Sorry.
And then, subsequent to that, there were other different periods, each period finding a different way, until the coming, so to speak, to our broader period, when people became wise, and they started studying. They pointed out, listen, the intelligence, this is the primary element of the human being, and science came into focus. And what is science? Science, they said, science is a trusted and a logical way to prove or disprove things by testing. And they say we can make an empirical testing. You know what empirical test means? Empirical test? Physical, something that's visible. A test that you can actually demonstrate. And if you make empirical tests, you can prove various things. Now, in itself, it sounds very beautiful, wonderful. Yes, and science has actually benefited humanity, so to speak, immensely. But along with that came a new philosophy. The philosophy that's based, so to speak, on this principle, that anything that can be proven, shown empirically demonstrated, that is the truth. And anything that does not have a physical demonstration is not true. Since God, you cannot demonstrate physically. Therefore, who is God? This is the latest onslaught. Huh? Yes. This is the latest onslaught. It's all wonderful, and this is an onslaught on God and God's presence in the world. which is much more powerful than anything before, because everything before was just based on tivus, on personal likes and emotions. So this is based on intellect. What can be more powerful or more convincing than the intellect itself? How can you? And as a matter of fact, this is one of the most difficult things to overcome. And one gets caught in, so to speak, in this type of philosophy, and he carries the philosophy of the science that comes from the scientific view, and that everything that the world will all be explained empirically. It's extremely difficult to extricate yourself from, to free yourself from. It's extremely difficult. It's like a quicksand. You know what quicksand is?
Mm-hmm.
You know what quicksand is?
Yeah.
What's the problem? What's the difficulty to get out of the quicksand?
If you move, you keep on going down.
Because in quicksand, you have nothing to base yourself on, nothing to push yourself out from. The only thing that can carry a human being is his brain. Now his brain is sinking, so how is he going to pull himself up? Nothing to pull, nothing to push out. It's extremely difficult. You cannot get out by yourself. Absolutely not. And somebody pull you out by the lapels, by your ears, by your hair, by your beard. To counter, okay, I just want to make one little point. The truth is that this philosophy is really false. Because this principle, that only that which can be demonstrated physically is the truth, is not a true principle. There is spirit in the world. There is a neshama. There's life. That's not physical. But those who subscribe to that philosophy, those who get caught up into it, they ignore that spirit, and they, as a matter of fact, say that everything that occurs in the human being, this supreme being in this world, nobody can understand the human being. Everything that occurs in this human being is all essentially physical. Even the spirit itself is spirit. How one can fool himself that way, beyond me. But that's possible. And the reason it's possible is because when it comes to actions, they can say, you know what happens in action? You know what happens? The brain sends out some kind of a spark, some kind of a symbol, a signal, some kind of an electric pulse. And that gets picked up by the heart. And that gets pumped up through the muscles. And then the hand moves. That's all it is. There's nothing else to it. And, they have, so to speak, a principle, a basis to say that. Because as a matter of fact, sometimes, a person has a paralysis in his hand. God forbid. After a stroke or something. So there's one way that they can affect and cure it and help it out. I've seen it myself in a certain person. That it's a semi-paralysis. That they locate that part in the brain that controls that part of the body, and they give it, so to speak, they give it an inspiration. They shock it into life by dropping a drop of alcohol.
Good job.
It's an amazing thing. I knew a person who went through this. This was, done very precisely, and then a drop of alcohol on that spot in the brain, and he was able to control his hand. For that moment, during the moment when it happened, when the drop was first dropped on the hand, he was in full control. He was like the hand was fully stable. Afterwards, it dissipated a lot, but he was still able to. It was much better than before. So you say, see, it's all physical. Even the brain is a physical thing. The reality, however, is that this is not a correct analysis of what happened. It is true that the brain, that there's a physical process to everything that happens in the physical body, but this is only what we call in Chassidus the keli. This is the receptacle. This is the means by which the spirit of the neshama comes through. The brain does not have its own will. It has the ability to process the will, but it doesn't have its own will. The will to live is not a brain element. It doesn't come from the physical brain. This is something which is bestowed upon it. But it's very, very easy to ignore that. And this is what happened. But it is not universal, Baruch Hashem, but it's very challenging, even to the frumas, so to speak, the orthodox scientists. It's a big challenge. To this day, it's a big challenge that how to, so to speak, correlate and coincide science with faith, with belief. This is the latest challenge on the intellectual level. What is the antidote to that? What counters the intellectual onslaught on godliness? Chassidus. This is why Chassidus came and revealed at almost precisely at the time when that element in the world was being developed.
Did it come when Darwinism started?
Yeah, approximately. And at first came the Baal Shem Tov, and Mishmagid, and finally, of course, the Alter Rebbe, who really put it into an intellectual and an organized form. This is the counter. This is the antidote. And Chassidus, that's the time? 10:30 in the morning?
Yeah. I don't even know what that is.
Chassidus is that teaching that enables us to look directly into the soul and fully recognize the fallacy of this principle. Fallacy, falseness. Not only to recognize the fallacy of this form, fallacy, the falseness, the incorrectness of this thing, but it gives us a strength, a spiritual strength, a view of life, that we can actually, as we said before, see clearly in front of our eyes the truth of the soul, the godly truth. Not just theoretically, not just I believe because it said so, but actually internalize it. And actually find it, this is the important thing, find it deep down in our own mind, in our own heart, and see, yes, in fact, see, this is talking about me. It's talking about me. And there's no greater proof of the truth if the human being is you're not trying to define the human being. This is the truth. So that in anticipation and in preparation and in the process of preparing for Mashiach. Ourselves, every individual, ourselves. So besides that, we have to teach and so forth. But the first thing is, we have to bring, so to speak, that spirit, that recognition. And I said, not just I believe because it says so, but to have a personal view and a personal experience. Yes, indeed, this is the truth, and this is actually absolutely not only possible, but imperative, because the truth has to surface. And it has to be to the extent that this is something which is totally undeniable. It's not I believe because I want to believe, but because I actually focus in and I see this reality, this truth. Even if only for a moment. And this is what Chassidus explains. The very first teaching of Chassidus, starting from the Baal Shem Tov. And then the Alter Rebbe, of course, elaborated on it and defined it more in greater detail. What was the principle that Baal Shem Tov taught that changed the entire perspective? You see, it's so simple. It was a revolution, even in Jewish ranks. That every Yid has a neshama. That the primary element in the human being is not his intellect and not his emotion. It is his neshama. Okay? What's a neshama? How is it? Is it tangible? How much does it weigh? And Baal Shem Tov said that the neshama connects and recognizes godliness directly. And every simple, and even the most simplest of it, are able to recognize and relate to godliness through their neshama, way in a superior manner than the greatest scholar. The scholar can only explain to you theoretically, logically, but that's not relating to the reality. Relating to reality means to live with it. And that comes directly from the neshama. It says in Chassidus, and I don't know if you came across it, this is not that common a statement, that in everything in the world there is a nitzus eliki, is a godly spark. Did you hear that expression? Mm-hmm. In everything there's a godly spark. So you mean that? Okay. I want to discuss this spark. What does a godly spark mean? Again, yes, indeed, it says so, and we believe that what it says is true, and we accept it, we don't debate it, chas v'sholem. But that's not enough. All that is meant for us to understand, for us to be able to relate to it, to benefit from this knowledge. How do we benefit by knowing that in everything there's a godly spark? Well, how has that changed my view of the world? And what is the meaning of these terms, a godly spark? To understand this, we'll briefly discuss a very simple question. What, in fact, is the difference? Okay, we need really to focus in and understand this question. It's a simple question, but we have to focus in. What is the difference between world and God? Okay. From practical perspective, you'll say, the difference is world is the servant and God is the boss. You better listen to the boss. Finished. That does not give you any perspective at all what you mean by the word God. We say the world was created, and we are certain that the world was created. And since it was created by God. How does that answer our question? In other words, if the world has to come from someplace, that's what He has created, so where does God come from? In other words, we just, so to speak, pushing off the answer, the question. What is the meaning of what do we mean? We are human beings, we're intelligent human beings. What do we mean by the word God? And where do we get that idea from? We don't see God. Is it all because it's lip service again? We're just repeating what somebody else said? What does it mean? Is there something meaningful to us individually?
A cup of water for me.
I'm waiting for you.
Yeah, of course. No, that's what the
We have to reflect, what does it mean? Great. I'm sure everybody feels it. But we have to, the whole union of Chassidus is that we should be able to focus in and reflect on it and actually have a kind of a close relationship to it and experience it. To the extent that this should be akin similar to what the experience is going to be in Mashiach is coming.
What's the word? Akin?
Akin. Similar to. The difference between world and God is simply this. World, there is nothing, not any element in the world, small or big, that is a truth in and of itself. Everything in the world is what's called a composite. You know what a composite is? Composite means put together. I have a table. Oh, I know what a table is. Table is not a real element. It's a board with 4 legs. Everything in the world is a composite.
Like composed?
Composed,
like
put together.
Yeah.
It's combined from many things. Anything that's a composite, by definition, can be decomposed. Anything that can decompose is not a truth. It's not a truth.
Why? Because it disappears?
Why?
A truth.
Yeah, why? Why is that?
Okay, good question. Our time is a little bit limited, but I'll give you the principle. There is a principal difference between true and truth. I'd like you to understand this. True is what's called a relative term. Let's say, very simple, this watch is on the table. Is that true or false?
It's true.
True. Does the watch belong on the table? Must it be on the table?
No.
False.
So it's not truth. Truth means this is how it is, and that's it. It happens to be now, in this time, and this place, this moment, like that. That's true, but that's not the truth. Anything that's true, as I said, is a composite and can be decomposed. Truth cannot be decomposed. It's not composed of anything.
Isn't it the truth that it's sitting on the table right now?
No, it's true. If it were truth, then it would mean that it must be here. It's impossible that this should not be on.
Okay.
That's what truth is.
The truth can't change?
No.
You have the four elements.
Truth cannot change. That's the whole principle of truth. Now, understand, truth is a word that we use, and therefore it has what's called different levels, and different levels of our concept. Sometimes we say, it's the truth, I love you, it's the truth. The whole person is not true. It's not truth. Bin Laila Hoya here, I'm here and not here. That's it. But in relative terms, I say this is the truth. But truth in an absolute sense. Absolute means something which never changes. There's only one truth. And here's the point. World is by definition not truth. It's all a composite thing, and it's constantly changing. It's constantly changing. We discussed way back when, if you remember, not that long ago, we discussed Avraham Avinu. You remember that?
Yeah.
Avraham Avinu, he was born into a family, into a nation, into an area of idol worshippers on the lowest level, with idols. Really, stone, wooden idols. And this is what they bowed to. And Avraham Avinu, he was a little child, and on his own he felt there's nothing to it. This cannot be reality. And he started seeking, and in his mind, as the Rambam describes very briefly, viewing and analyzing what he's observing in the world. He's looking, where is the truth of the world? If there is anything, there has to be a truth behind it. There cannot be just this is not just a facade. This is not just an apparition. You know what apparition means? It's something that just appears and it doesn't real. It's not real. So he started looking, and he started saying, "Oh well, the sun. Look at the moon. Look at that." And he says everything is changeable. As long as it's changeable, this is not the truth. Until he came to realize that, very briefly, that the truth is really not part of the world at all. The world does not have the means of subsistence.
So like the sun goes up and down every day, so it's exactly the same.
Right. The world does not in itself has within its own arsenals, with its own resources to sustain itself. It doesn't have a truth. It can dissipate any minute. Like I said, anything that's a composite can also decompose. But if there is such a world, there has to be a truth that maintains it. There has to be a truth that maintains it. The sun rises every day on the precise instant and sets on the precise instant.
That's the way it's made.
I'm sorry?
That's the way it's made.
That's the way it's made.
There has to be that which maintains it. To answer your question, that the way it's made, I said I don't have time to elaborate this, but the truth is, nothing that's made can sustain itself without change for an indefinite amount of time. So it doesn't exist. The sun is, and this is one of the great things Hasidus points out, that the sun produces energy. And you know what it means, energy. A huge amount of energy. A huge amount of energy. We can't even measure it. It's a huge amount of energy that the sun produces. The sun is 93 million miles away from us. And we, 93 million miles away from the sun, can stand its ray. That's how powerful it is. And then it produces this energy. This is, okay, it's a huge body, but it's still a finite body. Finite, everybody understand what finite means? Limited, has an end. How can it produce this kind of energy without dissipating, without losing any of its power. For thousands of years on end. Clearly, in the world, and there are many other elements, the earth produces continuous produce and so forth. I just want to say that this is something which when you focus in, they all recognize. There's clearly in something functioning in the world, a power or a source or an element that is what's called truth. That is godly. What does the word godly mean? Godly is the opposite of worldly. If worldly is a composite, godly is echod. It's a perfect unity. It's truth at its highest and purest, on the purest level. This truth, even though we do not understand what it is, we cannot touch it, but we are coming face to face with it on a constant basis. We recognize that this truth, this is what's called the godly spirit, the spark, the godly spark in the world. In everything there's a godly spark. This is what maintains it. This is what gives its real presence. And the whole principle of preparing and understanding the Inyan Mashiach, understanding this, so to speak, short order future time, is to recognize that we can relate personally to the principle of this truth. Maybe we cannot fully, constantly live up to it, but we can relate to it. We can recognize, yes, indeed, this truth, this is the reality. And this is how we can close our eyes and say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, and we recognize this, that there is this unity. There's a real thing. So maybe I'll break down this whole talk into two talks. I have to conclude now. I just want to point out that we're coming to Yud Gimel Tammuz. Yud Gimel Tammuz, a very special day. This is the birthday, Yud Tammuz birthday of the previous Rebbe, and it's of course the Yom HaGiul of the previous Rebbe. The Giul of the previous Rebbe, this has occurred, so to speak, not in your time, but in our time. You all know people that were in that time. This was under circumstances that had no precedent. You know what precedent means? Had no liking to it any time before in history. The communists and the Nazis, they were the biggest inventors of evil, even after 5,000 years of the world. It's like they invented evil as if they would never existed. Novel ways of torturing, of destroying the world, destroying godliness. And they all coincided at the same time. The Rebbe single-handedly, he stood up to the communists. I want you to understand what the communist was. The communist rule was not just the rule of the fist. It was the rule of total carelessness. Total carelessness. You can... total carelessness. No respect for human life whatsoever. I'm sorry? Brutality beyond brutality, because brutality normally means he is brutal, but he knows he's killing a person. They didn't even know they're killing a person. It meant nothing to them.
No boundaries.
Huh?
Callous has no feeling, right?
No, there was absolutely. They could take a person. This happened Rahman al-Islam, to many, many of our people. They would come and arrest the person, arrest him, take him out of his home, take him to the prison, right away take him down to the basement and shoot him. This was communism. And you know something? It was in the name of an idealism, which is the worst that can be. I'm sorry?
You started that.
Yeah. Only a Jew can start that kind of a thing, because he has the ultimate good. He can also invent the ultimate evil. In other words, the opposition to godliness there was absolute, total. And the Rebbe, and there was absolutely no hope, no possibility of debating with them and saying, mercy, understanding. It didn't exist. The only thing that existed is the power of his spirit. But in Rebbe, with what you said just now, this godly spark in the world, godly spark in everything, and the godly presence, the reality, the truth that is inside, that makes the world tick, was by him a perfect reality. It's the only thing that he related to. And this is the way he stood up to them. You know the final story, which I'm sure you know. Actually, the Rebbe was told that he was being freed from prison. That was Gimel Tammuz. Just want to give you an example. That Gimel Tammuz. That was a week earlier. First he was in prison, and then was sent away to Kastramat, to Siberia. So, on Gimel Tammuz, he was actually freed 3 days earlier, on Thursday. And they said they were going to free him, and he has to then take a train and go to Kastramat for 3 years. And the Rebbe asked, when is he going to arrive to Kastramat? They told him, he's going to arrive on Shabbos. The Rebbe said, on Shabbos, I'm not traveling. And I'm not going. I'm not going. They said, in other words, he preferred, he opted to stay in prison under the hands of these brutal animals, but he's not going on Shabbos. And they warned him, this was never a Jewish guy. They said, look, then you'll stay here? He said, yeah, I'll stay here. Nothing swayed him differently. Nothing existed. And the Rebbe writes in his own memoirs that when he entered the prison, many miracles occurred, that we are first finding out how the Rebbe's life was saved by one little mistake and another little mistake. You know the story, right? Well, this is much, but I'm just saying, the Rebbe writes in the memoirs that when he entered this Spalerke, he made a resolution in his mind that he is going to disregard them totally. Totally. On what basis? How would he have the strength to disregard them totally? Because really the only thing that really exists is the truth, is the godly truth. Anything that denies godliness is a non-entity. And he, with his life, that's the only way to happen. With his life, with his status, he proved it through his own life. And he came out of there, and ultimately he went through the Second World War. You know that. There's so much talk about this Second World War. There was a German general. German general actually transported the Rebbe from Riga through Germany into safety. Ultimately, he reached these shores, immediately starting his work here. this is what I wanted to point out, is this principle. You have to understand that this knowledge of God that the Rambam speaks about is something which is accessible to all of us. And in preparation for as I say, we have to prepare for Mashiach. This is the preparation. We should not just be giving lip service. We want Mashiach now. I believe Mashiach. We have to also focus in and understand and see in ourselves, in our own mind. Is this a reality? Is it really true? Do I really see it? And the truth is, we all see it, but we don't know how to focus in on it. So, the Rebbe should help each one of us, me included, that we should access, reach in to the depths of our intellect, to the depths of our souls, and find these fine insights, and find the neshama that the Baal Shem Tov was talking about, which will, the mitzvah carry us through, like the Rebbe says in the Sikha, upon which my whole talk is based on, basically, that this emunah that we maintain and we have in the coming of Mashiach, this actually is instrumental in hastening the coming of Mashiach. Each one of us who recognizes the reality of Mashiach, not just giving lip service, but actually recognizing, bring Mashiach closer. And we should all, join together in the great simcha of the coming of Mashiach.
Amen.